Welcome to Planter, Merchant, Frontiersman, and Craftsman. This is Melinda Klein. Although when viewed as a whole, the economy of the English colonies seemed well diversified. Each group, the New England, Middle, and Southern colonies, specialized in certain economic activities. New England depended mainly on commerce and shipbuilding. The Middle colonies had both trade and agriculture. The farms of Pennsylvania and New Jersey produced abundance of crops of wheat, corn, fruits, and vegetables for local sale or for export, and like New York and Philadelphia, served as trading, financial, and cultural centers. The southern colonies were almost wholly agricultural, each possessing a backcountry yeomanry, but each dominated by an elite planter class that depended on a single crop. In Virginia, it was tobacco. In South Carolina, indigo and rice. It is estimated 90% of colonists were engaged in some aspect of agriculture. Manufacturing was of secondary importance. Although scattered throughout the Middle and New England colonies, small specialty shops especially engaged in ironworking, glass-making, hat-making, lumber milling, brick-making, and the distilling of rum. Devoted mainly to extraction and service, the colonial economy generally conformed to the mercantilist policies of the day. Colonies existed as a source of raw materials and as a market for finished goods. For this reason, the English Parliament legislated against colonial manufacturing, but not until the 1750s were serious efforts made to enforce these anti-business laws. By then, it was too late, of course, and revolution was the result. Many historians have considered William Byrd II an excellent or even an ideal example of the planter aristocrat in colonial Virginia. Detailed studies of his life and his diaries show that the life he led was somewhat different, broader than many of his class. Yet Byrd does serve to typify a culture built on tobacco at its most industrious and civilized time. Governor John Winthrop in 1631 launched New England's first trading ship, the Blessing of the Bay. Trade would, in time, bring great wealth to New England. By 1640, commerce and shipbuilding were the two primary economic pursuits. Ironically, for the man who launched the first ship, however, trade would also contribute to the downfall of the Puritan Empire and its way of life. In New England, a merchant, a term which meant one who traffics to remote countries, was no mere shopkeeper. He was engaged in the following activities. He bought and sold and bought more and resold to ports all over the world, transporting his cargo in ships built by craftsmen of his home region. He owned ocean-going merchant ships, fishing vessels, whalers, and coasters for trading along the Atlantic seaboard. His merchandise was anything that proved profitable. Fish and lumber were among the first cargoes. The New England merchant sold at both wholesale and retail and often ran his own banking business and underwrote insurance policies besides. In time of war, he accepted government contracts to arm his ships and prey on enemy vessels as a privateer in return for a share of whatever ships and cargoes he captured. 63 distilleries ran full-time in Massachusetts, with the result that New England rum replaced beer and cider as the favorite colonial beverage. Rum soon became an important product in the Atlantic triangular trade between England and Europe with Africa and the Americas, provided by colonial ships. For example, molasses, from the West Indies was made into rum by New England distilleries. The rum was then carried to the west coast of Africa and exchanged for slaves with native chiefs, and the slaves were sold to West Indian sugar planters and to planters in Virginia and other southern colonies. Lumber was also exchanged for sugar from the West Indies, and this sugar was carried to England for processing, whereas guns, textile, and hardware, along with household goods, were sold in Africa for labor and North America. Boston merchants were not against buying and the selling of slaves. They considered them a commodity as any other they did business with. However, Boston was never an important slave port. The slave market in New England was a small one. It served urban communities looking for, mostly, house servants such as cooks, maids, and butlers. One merchant trading house stands out in New England in a sea of others. The business house of Hancock is an outstanding example of a New England trading company. Its founder, Thomas Hancock, built the business from scratch and made him one of the richest merchants in the region. Hancock entered business in 1724 at the age of 21 as a bookseller in Boston, settling out to fulfill an agreement with a supplier to sell 3,000 books at 6% commission. This selling venture indicates the Yankee influence, interest in education, and desire to read that Hancock's book-selling business was successful from the start. He gradually moved into general merchandise. Later, he bought ships and formed a trading company. Within a few years, he was rich. In 1734, he took his nephew, John Hancock, into the business with him. Pioneering New England families needed a variety of items when they ventured out to the frontier, such as a flintlock rifle, a shotgun for small game and birds, supplies, tools such as a broadaxe to fell trees, a hoe, a scythe, harnessing for draft animals, and utensils such as frying pans and cooking pots. Frontier families were usually large. All members helped in clearing the land, building structures, tending animals, and harvesting crops. One incentive in Massachusetts for moving to frontier areas west was a 3-year exemption from property taxes. Sometimes entire church congregations would make such a move, expecting the hardships of disease, death, and native conflicts. In the cities of New England and the middle colonies, there was, however, a large population of professional craftsmen on whom people depended for shoes, silverware, pots and pans, houses, ships, and many other products made in the colonies for local consumption and sale outside the colony. The craft most in demand in the southern colonies was that of copper, a maker of kegs, barrels, hogsheads, and casks to hold tobacco, rice, tar, turpentine, corn, and flour shipped abroad. Skilled artisans lived up and down the Atlantic coast. Paul Revere, a well-known Boston patriot, was a silversmith and an engraver. He had already acquired a reputation as a designer of fine silverware, elegant tankards, bowls, pitchers, and tea sets, which have been treasured throughout the centuries. In conclusion, this lecture has illustrated 4 representative groups in the colonial population. However, keep in mind, the colonial thriving economy could not have existed without the labor and immigration of indentured servants and others.